Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to take a look at the question of, so what have we learned about the multiverse so far? And boy, have we learned a lot. Now, there will be spoilers for Quantumania in this video, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, I do recommend going to see it first. But assuming you've seen it, then let's dive right into what we've learned about the multiverse so far and where things may be going in the future. All right, so if we look at the history of the multiverse in the MCU, there are mentions as far back as Thor: The Dark World. That is amazing. If you remember when Dr. Selvig went all crazy and just started putting random stuff on the chalkboard, so many Easter eggs on this chalkboard. Although, Dr. Selvig, if you could move out of the way, it would be really helpful. Could you just... Excellent. Okay, great. Now check out some of these Easter eggs. First of all, I believe this is the earliest reference to 616 in the MCU. And of course, now they're calling the MCU 616. So very interesting. At this point, it was just, a random Easter egg, but now it's been adopted that the MCU is 616. Interesting. Also, there's a reference to the Nexus of all reality. That's the place where the Watcher hangs out in What If. There's a reference to the Fault and Crossroads. A fault is basically a tear between two universes, and the crossroads is how you go between them. Just amazing. This board probably has even more Easter eggs on it. Love it. Absolutely love it. But the biggest reference to the multiverse would, of course, be in Doctor Strange. The Ancient One explains the multiverse to Doctor Strange when she says, "This universe is only one of an infinite number, worlds without end, some benevolent and life-giving, others filled with malice and hunger. Dark places where powers older than time lie ravenous and waiting. Who are you in this vast multiverse, Mr. Strange?" So clearly, at the time of Doctor Strange, there wasn't just the MCU, i.e. one universe. There was a multiverse. In fact, you might remember this visual, which is, gross. But nonetheless, forgetting that, doesn't this look very similar to, at the end of Loki, when He Who Remains died, how the sacred timeline started branching, and then branching on the branches, and then branching on the branches of the branches? Amazing, right? I mean, I have no idea when they did this visual if that's where they were going, but it sure is interesting to think back on it. So yeah, there was absolutely a multiverse in Doctor Strange. So let's look at this interview in Screen Rant that Kevin Feige himself gave about how they're going to approach the multiverse and different dimensions in the movie. So I'm not going to read the whole article, just going to touch on certain things, although you might check out the article. It's really interesting. But so he talks at one point about a lot of our interpretation of the multiverse and various dimensions. So right there, he's already distinguishing that there's a multiverse and then that there are many dimensions. Okay, great. Later, he talks about parallel dimensions and multiple dimensions. Now, I think when he says parallel dimensions, he's really talking about the multiverse, and we'll see why in a second. And then later when he's talking about multiple dimensions, that's like the dark dimension and the quantum realm, etc. But anyway, keep this thought in mind. Okay, he also says, you've heard me talk about the quantum realm. The quantum realm is another dimension. So it seems like realm and dimension are being used interchangeably there. A lot of usage of the same terms in this article, unfortunately. Now, I'm going to read this whole section because this is so fascinating. It really gets to the heart of the discussion. He says, I think when comic book fans hear parallel dimensions or multiple dimensions, they think of Earth 616 and Earth 617 and Earth 618. So already there, I think he's talking about the multiverse, right? Because those are different universes. He says that's all possible. But what we're playing with in this world is there are dimensions, that the other dimensions are not just parallel realities, although some of them are, but there are the dark dimension where Dormammu inhabits. There are dimensions that are so mind-bending that you can barely perceive them. There are dimensions where a lot of the Ditko images come from. There are dimensions that are just mind trips that the human mind can barely fathom, which is why it's hard to turn them into something to show audiences in November. But we're playing as much with the notion of the multiverse as much as alien dimensions, for lack of a better term, than parallel realities where there's Strange that wears Iron Man armor. We're not there yet. Wow, so much here. But the key is, he's again seeming to mesh the concept of dimensions are not just parallel realities, which I think is the multiverse. And then again, he talks about the multiverse is both alien dimensions, like the dark dimension, and it is parallel realities, like one where Doctor Strange wears Iron Man armor. Okay, cool. And then finally, he says, again, we're going to tap into this notion of the multiverse of dimensions right next to our own. So I really wish he hadn't, used the word dimension so many times, but it seems pretty clear he is saying there is a multiverse, which is set up of multiple universes, and there are dimensions. Okay, great. So, just as an example, here are only a few of the many realms or dimensions. Obviously, the quantum realm, which we're going to talk a lot about, the ancestral plane, the mirror dimension, the soul world, where Gamora went and Black Widow went when they died, the Citadel at the end of time, the Nexus of all realities. I mean, these are just a few of them. I should probably do a video on all of them because there are probably 20 or 30 different realms or dimensions that have been mentioned. But we're going to focus, of course, on the quantum realm. So here's the big question. After reading what Kevin Feige had to say and reading an article we're just about to talk about, is there more than one quantum realm? Or is it a multiverse and one quantum realm? I mean, Kevin Feige seemed to make it sound like they were separate. There's a multiverse and there's dimensions. But let's see what, in particular, Jeff Loveness said in a recent article about Quantumania. And of course, Jeff Loveness was one of the writers. He said that it is like the basement of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He discussed the microscopic dimension and how it differs from the MCU's other fantastical locations in an interview with Marvel. We really wanted to build on it from the ground up, and we thought, how do we make the quantum realm different from just outer space? How do we make this different from underwater, like Namor's kingdom, Talokan? He said, we came up with the idea that basically it's like the basement of the multiverse. It's this connected limbo outside space and time. And of course, in the movie, Janet also says it's outside space and time. She uses that same basic quote. So I think he's really saying there is one quantum realm for the entire multiverse. And it kind of makes sense because it's outside of space and time. So why would there be a ton of the quantum realms? However, I got to bring this up because somebody's going to mention in the comments if I don't. There was a what if episode that complicates this. In the one with the Marvel zombies, the Watcher explains, Dr. Hank Pym journeyed into the quantum realm, searching for his long-lost wife. But in this universe, Janet Van Dyne contracted a quantum virus that corrupted her brain. So this is the period of time, if you remember, when Janet got trapped in the quantum realm for the 30 years, and in it, she caught the quantum virus. Well, obviously that didn't happen in 616. So then, is there more than one quantum realm? Can you branch in the quantum realm? Honestly, I don't know. I mean, they've made this complicated. I mean, what if I do believe is canon? I mean, it's in the MCU timeline on Disney+. So I think it's canon, but I wish they would have reconciled how this happened. But let's throw out a couple possibilities. Number one, it could be the quantum realm is so vast that if more than one version of yourself from different universes is in it, the quantum realm makes sure you don't run into each other. I don't know how, it just does, right? Or it's possible that if you're in there more than once, you're out of phase with your other self. Remember, Ghost had phasing issues, obviously. Maybe that's how it handles it. I don't know. I would love an explanation, and maybe when the timeline book comes out, they'll tell us. But the key is, I do believe there is one quantum realm, even though this episode happened in What If, which kind of complicates it. So, okay, one quantum realm. Let's talk a little bit more about it. Well, I brought this up, so let's bring up how time works in the quantum realm. If you remember, Janet went in 1987. We learned she tried to stop that nuke and had to go subatomic. And then they rescued her in Ant-Man and the Wasp in 2018. So she was in the quantum realm for 31 years. And she aged, basically, 31 years. So for her, time flowed relatively normally. Granted, again, the quantum realm is outside time and space. But within it, it flowed normally for her. But if you remember, it didn't for Scott, because Scott fell into a time vortex. Because when he got out in Endgame of the quantum realm, Black Widow said, hey, it's been 5 years. And Scott says, yeah, but that's just it. It wasn't. For me, it was like 5 hours. See, the rules of the quantum realm aren't like they are up here. Everything is unpredictable. And of course, in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Janet had warned him, don't fall into a time vortex, which he clearly did. So it's just interesting to know that depending on how you enter the quantum realm, time may flow differently. Remember the ants in Quantumania, the ants that go into the quantum realm? They advanced, what, like 1,000 years or something? I don't remember the exact amount of time, but it was a long time. And they did that just in the amount of time that Hank was in the quantum realm himself. So the quantum realm is funky. That's the bottom line. We just have to accept it's really, really funky. Okay, so now let's move to the rules of time travel. I did a whole video on time travel, which if you've never seen it, it's worth watching. I'm just going to summarize a few points from there. But the number one, most important statement about time travel, I think, in the entire MCU is the Hulk, when he says, if you travel to the past, that past becomes your future, and your former present becomes your past, which can't now be changed by your new future. I love that description. It very visually paints it for you, but it is also a little confusing too. I wish he would have just said, when you go into the past, it creates a branch to a new universe or a new reality or a new timeline, however he wanted to say it. That would have been even simpler, but he didn't say that. But nonetheless, think about it. There's no way you can travel to the past and guarantee that the changes you make don't affect your future unless you branch. The minute you go back in time, it has to be. So think about this. In Endgame, look at all the branches they would have created. I mean, one of the groups that went back to get the Power Stone, they knocked out Star-Lord. I mean, knocked him out cold. He may have been out cold for hours. So he would have maybe missed getting the Power Stone in the regular timeline. Likewise, Captain America fought himself. And he told Sitwell, "Hail Hydra," now making Sitwell think that he's Hydra? I mean, these are changes that are major. And then, of course, Loki bolted off with the Tesseract. I mean, clearly, these things did not happen in the main timeline. Now, it's also interesting to note, I believe in some cases they created branches off the branch. Because if you remember, after Loki disappeared, he showed up, as we find out in Loki season 1, in the desert. And they come and they clip his branch. They reset it. So if they reset his branch, wouldn't that have reset the other ones? No, I don't think so, because I think this was a branch off the branch, because that happens. Remember at the end of Loki, branches off of branches off of branches. It's very possible for that to happen. Okay, so I think this is key, and I'm going to stand by this, but if you don't believe this personally, that's okay. But I'm just going to reiterate again, when Captain America went back in the past, he created a branch with Peggy. There is no way he was in the regular timeline. It would break all the rules we learned in Loki. You cannot go to the past and not create a branch. Now, then he, of course, obviously appeared again in the future. So I've had some people say, no, he had to have been in the same timeline, because how did he get back? He would have shown up in the time pad, and he didn't. So, no, that doesn't make any sense. He can't just show up behind a tree. That doesn't work that way. Well, let's think about this for a minute, though. How do you get back to your own timeline? In each of these cases, how did they get back? Well, we saw in Endgame, obviously, they used the quantum realm, but they also used that pad that Hulk created. However, of all places, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which some people don't even consider canon, but I do until it's said it's not canon. It's canon to me. Fitz comes up with the explanation. The final season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. came out actually after Endgame, so they kind of took the rules in Endgame and said them so much simpler. Fitz said, you, the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., went back in time, and then you branched off. But we can travel through something called the quantum realm, so we can go in between timelines. So if Fitz was able to figure out how to do it without the Hulk's time pad, then I think Captain America created a branch. He lived out a long life. He met up with Hank Pym, maybe Scott Lang, one or two of them, got some more Pym particles, and they told him how to travel without using the Hulk's time pad. I mean, he had a whole lifetime plus his own experiences, so easily he could have gotten back too. If Fitz can figure it out, not Captain America himself, but someone in the branch timeline could figure it out. All right, anyway, here's though why branching became confusing in Endgame. This quote. So, the Ancient One tells Bruce, hey, the Infinity Stones create what you experience as the flow of time. Remove one of the stones, and that flow splits. Now, this may benefit your reality, but my new one, not so much. In this new branched reality, without our chief weapon against the forces of darkness, our world will be overrun. So tell me, Doctor, can your science prevent that? What I wish is that Bruce would have turned to her and said, okay, funny thing that we're actually in a branch right now because we're from the future and you're in a branch already. We'll create another branch when we take the stone, yes, but we're already in a branch. But he didn't say that, so it left you thinking that it didn't create a branch until they took the stone. But there's no way that's possible. I've already covered that. There's just no way. But anyway, so Bruce then makes it a little more complicated by saying, no, we can erase it. Because once we're done with the stones, we'll return them to each to its own timeline at the moment it was taken. So chronologically, in that reality, it never left. And this is why I would pay good money to see how Steve Rogers did this. Please, let me see him meeting up with the Red Skull. on Vormir to return the stone. If he even did meet him, I don't know, but that'd be awesome if he did. Did he show up and he's right a second after this and says hi to Bruce? Hey, Bruce, go take the stone. I'm going to return it. I just want to see that, please. I would pay good money. But anyway, so this made it sound like, oh, this gets rid of the branch. It does get rid of the branch that was created because they took the stone, but they already were in a branch because they went back in time. So anyway, enough of that. So one thing that kind of bugged me is after we get all those really clear rules in Endgame, they turn around and make new ones in Ms. Marvel. Ugh, because she goes back in time and does affect her future. However, I will give credit to the creator because she tried to explain it. She says, yes, we had the Avengers Endgame rules that you can't go back in like a consequential way. However, between Endgame and Ms. Marvel, another little show came through called Loki, which I was very much a part of figuring out how time could work. And I would say that I think it wouldn't have caused a Nexus event because of the inevitability of it. So it was a closed loop. So I will give her credit. She looked into Loki, she looked at the rules, and she said, I don't think this is a Nexus event, which we'll talk about Nexus in just a second, because she had to do it. So it was a closed loop. She had to go in the past to make her future work. I guess I don't like it. I like the branching rules better. This feels a little Back to the Future-y, but not entirely. So, okay, we're going to call it an isolated incident. Plus, her bangles are magic, I think, so it wasn't using the quantum realm. Anyway, we'll let it go. It is funny, though. She follows up by saying, so that's what's up. And it was also the fact that a Nexus event is caused by, you know what? I'm going to get shouted at by somebody. Either a fan or by Marvel, I can't tell which, but I will say this, that for me, it made perfect sense, and it fit into the logic of what was established in the TVA, which seemed like the ultimate ruling on time, I think. So anyway, I will give her credit again for trying to stick to the rules. It sounds like she got a little flustered there and maybe wasn't so sure, but nonetheless, they tried. Just please don't do this anymore, Marvel. Stick to the branching rules. Now, this is interesting too, though. There's a What If episode, probably the best one. Even if you don't watch the rest of the episodes, watch this one. It's so good with Doctor Strange. He tries to go back in time to fix the What If event of the episode, which is, what if Christine Palmer died? So basically, she dies. And he wants to go back in time and correct that. However, he learns that he can't. Because without Christine's demise, Strange doesn't become a sorcerer, doesn't defeat Dormammu, and doesn't gain access to the Time Stone to come back in the first place. Destroying the absolute point and altering his own timeline won't create just a branching path, notice, branching path. Instead, it would lead to the destruction of his entire reality. So this is a fascinating new concept, saying there are some things you cannot go back in time and change. Yeah, it creates a branch, we get that, but he cannot create a branch where Christine didn't die, because if she didn't die, he wouldn't have become Doctor Strange. I love it. Fascinating. Will be really interesting to see if this comes into play later in the multiverse saga. So, all right. Now, let's really get down to Loki then. So, time travel and the multiverse are basically the same thing. And it's very well established by Michael Waldron himself, who did an interview with Screen Rant and was asked, hey, how early in the process did you get involved? Did Marvel say to you, we want a show about Loki? Or did they say, we want a show about Loki and time travel and the TVA and variants? So, Michael Waldron, who wrote Loki, says they wanted a show about Loki and the TVA. They had done amazing work, as they always do, just kind of like laying the groundwork for the general sandbox you're going to be playing in. That was what I came in and pitched on. Then it was me and my writing staff working on it and kind of figuring out like, oh, you know what? Time travel basically is the multiverse. And you sort of put it all together as a team. So I love that. He watched Endgame, he tried to stick to the same rules, and he realized, wow, this is what's creating the multiverse, is, going back in time. Or at least it's one of the things that creates the multiverse. Because obviously in Loki, we learn that alternate timelines can happen without time travel. As Miss Minutes explains, and I think she was being a little simplified in her explanation, but still, she says, hey, just being late to work can cause an alternate timeline. Or, of course, starting a revolution. But let's just stick with being late to work. Any simple decision, any change to what could have gone this way or this way, like a fork in the road, could create a branch, a Nexus event. Wow, that's really cool. In fact, really, if you think about it, that's the entire premise of What If, right? I mean, as the Watcher says, time, space, reality. It's more than a linear path. It's a prism of endless possibility, where a single choice can branch out into infinite realities, creating alternate worlds from the ones you know. I'm the watcher. I'm your guide through these vast new realities. Follow me and ponder the question, what if? So basically he's saying a single choice could branch out into infinite realities. And really that's what Miss Minutes was saying too. The single choice of, doing whatever you did that made you late to work. Well, now we have infinite realities. Okay, great. So we've got time travel can create the multiverse, and we've got just basically a decision can create a Nexus event. So let's really get down to this Nexus event. And I've mentioned this quote in other videos, but I'm going to go to it even further with some other additional information I think really helps. This is just critical to understanding the multiverse. So once again, Michael Waldron, same interview, it was on Screen Crush if I didn't say that earlier, says, and that's just how time works. There's always like different permutations and instances happening. The TVA has their own barometer, their own gauge of what constitutes a deviation from the baseline, the way it's supposed to go. The way it went that produced He Who Remains. That is their baseline. So you see the key there. The key is a baseline, the sacred timeline, if you will. That's the timeline that creates He Who Remains. But any deviation, that's a problem. But then he goes into it more, which is great. A little later he says, if you zoomed in on the timeline, it wouldn't necessarily look like a straight line. It might look like the intertwined strands of a rope, fluctuating and spiking here and there. When it becomes a problem for the TVA is when, according to their own rules, when could something branch off in a way that could actually produce a new timeline, that could produce a new version of He Who Remains? That is the practical thing they're guarding against. Wow. I mean, so major, so important here. All right, so let's look at a couple things he says. So the sacred timeline looks like intertwined strands of rope, fluctuating and spiking here and there. Let's look at this, because this is really important. If you look at the timeline, the sacred timeline, before He Who Remains was killed, if you look at that, there's clearly more than one line there. That's why there was a multiverse. Remember, Dr. Strange said, there is a multiverse. Okay, we can see it right there, right? Then when He Who Remains is killed, it starts to go nuts, right? It starts to branch off, and then branch off even more, and then branch off into insanity. And remember those fingers, that nasty finger hand gross thing from Doctor Strange. But here's the key. Now look back at the first image, and you can see clearly that a timeline is represented by a thinner line, and there's multiple of them there. So that's why he's saying there was a multiverse before He Who Remains, and it's intertwined strands of rope. But here's the key. Those intertwined strands of rope are safe. The problem is, anytime a new He Who Remains, a new Kang, could be created, that's a Nexus event they have to clip. The irony is, I don't think the TVA knew that. No one told them exactly why they were doing it. They were just told, this is a deviation, get rid of it. But we know it's Kang, He Who Remains, preventing any other Kangs from being created. Okay, great. That totally makes sense. So you can have Nexus events that don't pose an issue. But if those Nexus events result in a new He Who Remains, that's a problem. Okay, then this is also interesting. What is that weird red line? In fact, Miss Minutes asks Loki when he's learning about the TVA. She says, what happens when a Nexus event branches past the red line? Loki's pretty bored. He's like, it's when the TVA can no longer reset a Nexus event. And she prods him more, and then he says, and that would lead to the destruction of the timeline and the collapse of reality as we know it. So he was getting annoyed. But here's what's really interesting about that. That means that when a Nexus event occurs, there is at least a period of time when the branch is not permanent. Now, you could argue this is a bit of a plot contrivance they created, because think about it. If they didn't have that time where they could go and erase the branch, you would have a new Kang popping up immediately. Boom! Nexus event, there's a Kang. This is a window of time. They don't say how much, but there's a window of time when the branch has not fully stabilized and formed. But as soon as it hits that red line, you can imagine, now we got a new Kang. Fascinating, right? It's just fascinating how this all comes together. Okay, so what about incursions? Now, we learn in Doctor Strange, that's where they first start talking about incursions. And in particular, Kevin Feige gave this quote where he said, "He who remains is gone." And that allowed a spell to go wrong in Spider-Man No Way Home, which leads to the entire multiverse going quite mad in Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness. So let's first talk about No Way Home, and then we'll move over to Multiverse of Madness, where they talk more about incursions. Now, some people have said, oh, well, right here, Kevin Feige says it's only when He Who Remains is gone that let the spell mess up in No Way Home. So therefore, the Tobey and Andrew universes didn't exist until He Who Remains was killed. And I see why you could get that from this quote. But I would argue that's not what Feige said. Feige just said He Who Remains is what allowed the spell to go wrong. In other words, implying if He Who Remains was alive and Doctor Strange botched the exact same spell, this wouldn't have happened. So why did it happen after He Who Remains died? Well, that's because the multiverse went nuts, and the borders between the timelines were now overlapping, allowing his spell to go nuts. So whether or not you believe Tobey and Andrew's universes existed prior to He Who Remains' death is up to you. I personally believe they did, though, because I think that's cool, and I'd love to think that they were around in their own universe, but around at the same time as the MCU was forming. But I think really the most important thing is the reason his spell went wrong is because the boundaries between the timelines were messed up. And before that, they weren't messed up. You had a multiverse, but they weren't overlapping. So again, let's talk about these incursions. This really comes into play in Multiverse of Madness, when Reed Richards says, an incursion occurs when the boundary between two universes erodes and they collide, destroying one or both entirely. And obviously the potential for those incursions is now, magnified immensely by He Who Remains dying. Also, though, individuals can create an incursion. He gives two examples. He says someone's presence in an alternate universe that is not their own confuses the universe and destabilizes reality. As a result, the more evidence they leave behind of their presence in an alternate universe, the more damage they will do. And then also, of course, we learn in the movie that someone doesn't need to be physically present in the other universe to cause an incursion because dreamwalking can do it. So those are two important things. But here's something interesting about the first one. If someone's presence in an alternate universe, not their own, confuses the universe and destabilizes reality, why did the Black Widow not create an incursion at the end of the What If series? Because obviously the Watcher plopped her into a different universe. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's clear that they were looking at the rules in Endgame because there's so much works well. So maybe it's the fact that her own universe was destroyed. Basically, it was gone. So there isn't the possibility for an incursion because the old one isn't even there. That's the most likely answer. It's also possible there are certain circumstances where you can be in a different universe and not cause it to destroy. But I tell you what, if there's an example that I do want to destroy the other universe, that would be the Sony universe for stealing Vulture. Doggone it, I will never let this go. It doesn't make sense. The spell didn't work that way. He shouldn't be in the Morbius universe. And if they won't give us back a Vulture, I say he destroys the Morbius universe. Darn it. I hate that end credit scene. Anyway, so now we've looked at incursions. Okay, so how about the multiversal war? Because that is critically important to understanding not just what Miss Minutes told us, and not even just what He Who Remains told us, but what we've now learned from Quantumania. If we put it all together, I think we have a really good picture of this multiversal war. I mean, Miss Minutes made it sound like, oh, there was a bunch of incursions, things were going crazy, the timekeepers came in, and la, 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 they fixed it all, and everything was wonderful. I mean, she's not wrong, but that's just a very simplified explanation. So, we get a much better explanation from He Who Remains. And there's some very important things. If you go back and you listen to his speech, wow, there are some very important details I did not pick up until rewatching it. So he says, eons ago, before the TVA, a variant of myself. So that dude right there, that is not He Who Remains. It is a variant of myself, lived on the Earth in the 31st century. He was a scientist and he discovered that there were universes stacked upon his own. At the same time, other versions of us. Interesting wording, right? Other versions of us were learning the same thing. Naturally, they made contact, and for a while there was peace. They shared technology and knowledge. However, not every version was so pure of heart, right? To some of us, new worlds meant only one thing, new lands to be conquered. The peace between realities erupted into an all-out war, each variant fighting to preserve their universe and annihilate the others. This is also interesting. He says that first variant, encountered a creature from all the tears in reality capable of consuming time and space itself. So it wasn't He Who Remains that discovered Eliath. It was some other variant. Very interesting. However, then for the first time, He Who Remains says, I harnessed the beast's power and began experimenting on it. I weaponized Alioth, and I ended the multiversal war. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, then he says, once I isolated the timeline, all I had to do was manage the flow of time and prevent any further branches, hence the TVA, hence the timekeepers, and a highly efficient bureaucracy, hence ages and ages of cosmic harmony. Now, it is interesting he created a loop. I don't know that I've ever fully understood why he had to do that, although I'm guessing that whenever the end of time is, it just, you get a new Big Bang and you start all over again. Okay. I mean, they haven't really fully fleshed that out, but it certainly does appear like he has fixed time into a loop. And most importantly, he makes sure none of those branches, none of the Nexus events create another Kang. Okay, great. But again, keep in mind, he's not the one that found Alioth. He did not start all this. Some other variant did. And I do believe we have very strong hints as to who that variant was. Okay, so then there you go, right? At the end of time, you have he who remains hanging out, enjoying life, and then he gets bored. He gets tired. He doesn't want this anymore. And so he manufactures a situation all along the way from beginning to end where both Loki and Sylvie can reach him. And I think one of the most interesting things that they never really explained, yet sure hinted at, is why was there a major Nexus event on Lamentus? What was it? I mean, they hint at the fact that it's because they kind of were getting attracted to each other, which is pretty weird for two variants to, only Loki could love himself, right? I don't think that's it. I think He Who Remains wanted them to find him, right? And they were about to die. So he created the Nexus event. He pushed a button on the machine and said, issue. The Nexus event is, I want you to save these guys. That's just my guess. But I don't think it had so much to do with them being attracted to each other. But who knows, right? Anyway, the end result after He Who Remains is killed is a revamped TVA now with, well, a very different Kang. Not the three timekeepers, one Kang. So that's interesting. I have some theories on who that is, but we'll see. That one I'm less, firmly sure on. But also, as we know, Ravonna jumped out of there, jumped in the time portal. We have no idea where she went. So that's a big mystery. Okay, now let's talk about the first multiversal war. Let's dive into that a little bit more, because when they enter, when Sylvie and Loki enter into He Who Remains, Citadel at the End of Time, remember there were 3 statues and 1 broken one. I think they have given us some very strong hints as to who the 3 are and who the broken one is. All right. I think He Who Remains created the timekeepers to mock, actually, who those original 3 were. So these 3 statues, sure, yeah, those are these 3 guys, right? But they're not really those 3. I think that was to mock them because He Who Remains didn't have much respect for them. I think those 3 are these 3 that we see at the end of Quantumania. So we're going to get into a lot more about who they are, but the bottom line is, conceptually speaking, I think those are the 3 statues. I think the one that was broken, remember how mad they were about the exiled one? I think the one that was broken is him. And I think, remember in Quantumania, he says that he was the one that wanted to control time, that he wanted to eliminate the problems, eliminate the other Kangs. I think this is the variant right here, this guy. He's the one that discovered Alioth and was going to use it. They got mad at him. They exiled him, the other 3, and broke his statue because they were ticked at him. And then he's been now in exile. And then it was He Who Remains, who was yet a 5th variant, if you will. He rose up, harnessed Alioth, and then wiped everybody out and took control. Interesting. So I'd love your theories. Remember, I read all the comments. I really want to know what people are thinking about all this, but I think he is the broken statue. So we obviously know he ends up in the quantum realm, and they eventually defeat him at the end of Quantumania, as we know. It looked like maybe he died. I don't think he died. I think he went into that multiversal core and is going to end up being able to access all points in time and has become super powerful, actually, and ultimately become the Beyonder, because we need a Beyonder if we're going to have Secret Wars. Now, I don't know if you've seen my video on whether the MCU will be a hard reboot or a soft reboot, but I talk a lot about Secret Wars. I'm not going to go into it here because that's way down the line, obviously, in the timeline. But I do believe that variant, that Kang, is going to become the Beyonder and build Secret Wars, the Battle World, because of all the incursions that are coming. We'll see. Don't know, right? But maybe. All right, so what did we learn about the new Kang Council? Well, so at the end of the first end credit, we see them all teleporting in using the same looking time devices that Reed Richards used in Multiverse of Madness. Isn't that interesting? Because Nathaniel Richards ultimately is an ancient ancestor of Reed Richards. So it makes sense that Kang would have knowledge of some of the technology that Reed Richards has. So yeah, that's kind of cool. Now, let's talk more about these three. Who are these three? Well, as I mentioned, I do think they're the three original people who were running things, who were running the Kang Council, who lived in the Citadel at the end of time. And so those statues were theirs, and of course the broken one again is the exiled one. But more importantly, from a comic book standpoint, do we have any frame of reference of who these are? Well, actually we do, yes. So the one on the left, I believe, is Rama-Tut. And Rama-Tut, and here's why I don't like the comics and Kang. In the comics, Kang didn't create branches. Kang just jumped all over in time, did whatever he wanted, rewrote time left and right. It's so confusing. I really got tired of Kang in the comics, actually. But I love the fact that in this case, they're all variants of Kang. So in the comics, Pharaoh Rama-Tut went into ancient Egypt, and he actually fought the Fantastic Four in ancient Egypt. It'd be very interesting to see where they go with this, since Kang can't just go back and rewrite time. Will this Pharaoh Rama-Tut really go back in time? Or did he go back in time and create a branch? And so is there going to be a branch where Pharaoh Rama-Tut was back in time? It would be very interesting to see. But then again, in the comics, the same Kang stopped being Pharaoh Rama-Tut and took the identity of Immortus. Now, Immortus is another one of his identities, and he was approached by the Timekeepers to preserve the timelines in exchange for immortality. And then ironically, even though both Rama-Tut and Immortus were the same in the comics, at one point they split into two. So again, comics are so confusing. So glad that these are not the same Kang, but variants. The last one is a little bit of a mystery. In the comics, there's somebody called the Scarlet Centurion. And obviously this guy is not dressed in red, although I guess maybe he'll put on a red suit later. Could be. But yes, you guessed it. He was another identity of the same Kang. And then at one point, even his son, Marcus, became Scarlet Centurion. So confusing. But the bottom line is these three are definitely have some origins in the comics, and so it'll be interesting to see how they're adapted in the MCU, since each one is a variant and not the same Kang. Also, there was an Easter egg in Moon Knight. This image on the back of this young man's jacket, that's the Pharaoh Rama-Tut image. So, maybe we're in a branch where Rama-Tut went in the past and, became a pharaoh, and people are still remembering him. I don't know. It'd just be very interesting to see what Marvel does with him. So then this is interesting. If you look in the end credit scene, those three are now at the end of time in the Citadel looking at the timeline being destroyed, which of course it was destroyed as a result of He Remains Dying. So this ties right into that. In fact, here's another look at what they're seeing when they look out the window. So that's really cool, directly tying in to the end of Loki. And then, of course, we have the new Kang Council. If you've never heard of the Kang Council, it was a weird-looking scene. There's no doubt about it. This dude is interesting because it kind of looks like Doctor Doom. So I don't know if they're going to do some type of tie-in to that, because they have the Doctor Doom and Kang have some ties in the comics. So that'll be interesting. But this is pulled right out of the comics. The Kang Council in the comics is nuts, man. They're just all nuts, screaming and yelling. Look at how weird some of them are. That's what we saw here. Jonathan Majors hamming it up, baby. Love Jonathan Majors, by the way. Fantastic casting for Kang. And then there's that weird dude. A Skrull? I don't know what it is. Anyway, the council is just craziness. But there's a few other Kang variants we meet. So we meet Victor Timely. Now, Victor Timely, what a surprise, is another persona that Kang took, but back in time, almost a century before the rise of the Avengers. So one of the interesting things is, I don't know if this was a retcon, I think it must have been, but Victor Timely was the reason that the original Human Torch, not the Human Torch from the Fantastic Four, but an android version, he's the reason he was created. Because if you read the panels there, it says, thus, it was in the guise of Victor Timely Jr. that the Master, Kang, welcomed a new recruit to Timely Industries in 1929, the young Dr. Phineas Horton. And Phineas Horton is the one that created the Human Torch. Now you may say, oh man, I don't care what happened in the comics. Why are you telling me all this? Well, because there actually was an Easter egg for that Human Torch. In the Captain America movie, that dude there, yep, that Human Torch inside the case there, That is an Easter egg for him. Now, will they ever go there and create an android Human Torch? I don't know. This might have just been a fun little Easter egg and they're moving on. But it's very interesting that we're now meeting Victor Timely, who in the comics helped somebody else ultimately create this Human Torch. And by the way, FYI, there was a group called the Invaders in the 40s. Had Captain America in it, Namor in it, or Namor, Bucky, and then you can see over on the far left, that's the Human Torch, and Toro was his little friend. But anyway, that's, again, he's an android, not like the Fantastic Four's Human Torch. So I don't think they're going to go there, but still, very interesting Easter egg nonetheless. All right, then what about the Kang variants we haven't met yet? Yes, there are even more in the comics. Oh my goodness, that guy really got around. So Iron Lad is actually a really important variant. He's a younger version of Kang who was given tech from an older version of himself, but decided, nope, I don't want to do villainous life. I'm going to go back in time and found the Young Avengers. So much time travel with Kang. It just is so confusing in the comics. So we know it won't be that way in the MCU because it would create a branch. So it would be very interesting to see when, where, and how we get introduced to Iron Lad. And then I'll at least mention yet another variant, Kid Immortus, who is a variant of Iron Lad who decided actually to be villainous. So I don't know whether we'll get Kid Immortus or not, but we can keep an eye out for him. So, oh my goodness, so many variants. But it is what's cool because of the way the MCU is making them separate and also not able to just jump around in time. They create branches. It's going to be kind of fun to see where these guys keep popping up. All right, so I am now going to try to summarize everything we just said with a visual image. Because I couldn't get all this in my head. I mean, I went over so much information. You're probably like, I'm just zoned out. This is too much. I'm going to simplify it for you. So we have, let's call it the sacred timeline, the beginning of time. Over on the left, the yellow line, all the way to the 31st century. Then on the bottom, because I don't know what else to do with it, that's the quantum realm. Okay? So really simple. We have a timeline starting at the beginning of time and going to seemingly the end of time and the quantum realm. So we know that over time, there have been branches, right? We learned that because there were parallel universes. We know that. And we know that the first time around, so this is before Loki and all that, this is the first multiversal war, that we had those three variants, right? We had He Who Remains, and we had the one that was ultimately exiled, we'll call him Kang. So they're all living in the 31st century. They all meet each other, just like Kang said. They end up in the war, and the lowest one, Kang, discovers Alioth. I think that is what made the three exile him. So they shoot him into the quantum realm. Now, I don't quite know what to do with this because remember, they are outside of time. They're in the Citadel at the end of time, and they're shooting this Kang into the quantum realm, which is outside of time and space. So who knows how this works? But for now, I'm just going to make a poof mark, and I'm going to keep the poof mark to represent Kang is in that poof. We'll come back to it, I promise. But so they exile him, he's gone. All right? The problem is they exiled the wrong guy because He Who Remains is the one that weaponizes Alioth and does something with these guys. I don't know what he does. I'm not sure yet. I haven't decided. Again, leave your comments what you think. He either exiles them also, I'm not in the quantum realm probably, but does something with them, or he kills them. Either way, they're out of the picture. So they're gone. Then He Who Remains sets up Alioth. Oh, sorry, prunes the branches, right? So we had all those that created all those Kangs. Gone. Get rid of them. So he's pruned them all, reset them all, whatever it took, and killed them all. Actually threw them into Alioth is what he did. And then set up what we see in Loki. The TVA on the top, Alioth to consume all the branches, the Citadel at the end of time, and then there he is sitting there chilling like a villain. All right, so that's all great. All those things happened. Now then, let's go into the sacred timeline. So in 1987, as we learn, Janet goes into the quantum realm because she goes subatomic. Great. And she hangs out for a while until we hit poof mark. Now, here's what's just so weird. I don't know how to explain why he showed up at this point. I mean, he was shot from the end of time into a void, into the quantum realm, which is void of time and space. So I don't know. All I know is he comes out, right? Let's not think too hard. He comes out of the poof. He gets shot in, and sure enough, there they are hanging out. And now we learn what happens in the flashbacks in Quantum Mania, that she found out he was actually a conqueror, that he wanted to now certainly wipe out those other three. He's so mad at him, right? She sabotages his machine. She runs off and gets out of the way, so he can't find her. They even try to lead the revolution, and then ultimately she gets shot out. and they save her or rescued. So great. She goes in 1987, comes out in 2018. Of course, the bad guy Kang is still in the quantum realm. Time continues on for him. Okay, cool. In the meantime, 2023, very important date, right? That's the time heist. So they go back to many points in time. I'm not covering them all here because they don't matter. 2012 is the only one that's really important, but we all know, right? They went to 2013, they went to 2014. They even ended up going back into the 70s because they messed up some things in 2012. Anyway, I'm just putting 2012 in here, and that's all the stuff they start doing, that the Avengers start doing. This is the Hail Hydra branch. You know, this is Bruce taking the stone from the Ancient One, etc. But remember what also happened? Loki. That's why I'm saying Loki created a separate branch when he took off with the Tesseract. So suddenly that is an issue to the TVA. So the TVA grabs him out of the timeline, brings him into the TVA, prunes his timeline, but not the branch that the Avengers were in, not the one that they're working on, and not the one that Steve Rogers has to return the stones to. Then at the end, they come back to 2023, and I'm not sure what exactly removes the branches. I'm assuming Steve returning the stones did it, or the TVA did it. But either way, those are gone. Yay. So that's why the TVA said the time heist was supposed to happen, but you, Loki, weren't supposed to happen. But of course, the TVA was being lied to because He Who Remains wanted Loki to happen. So you wonder how much of all of this was actually Kang planning it all, or He Who Remains planning it all, because he wanted them to come to him, to find him and help him retire, basically. Okay, so now Loki is with the TVA. Eventually, he finds Sylvie. They both end up in front of Eliath. I'm summarizing a bunch of episodes there, obviously. They defeat Eliath. I don't know if he's dead or if he's just asleep, enchanted. Either way, he's gone for the time being. They get to the Citadel at the end of time. They encounter He Who Remains. They fight about what to do. Sylvie dumps Loki into the time portal, and she turns around and kills He Who Remains. So now she's just hanging out at the end of time, and everything's going nuts, right? Everything is going nuts. Boom. Multiverse is back. I realize I use the same image because I'm lazy, but you get the idea. Boom. And here's the key. The branching can happen at all different points in time. So some of the branching was before present day in the MCU, some was after, and instantly all points in time exist at once, so all the new Kangs start popping up. So first, we see the new TVA and Loki at the end of season 1, and I really can't wait to see what's going on there. My guess, by the way, is that that statue represents Immortus, because Immortus seemed to be the leader of the three. So I think that he just made himself as opposed to the three. Sylvie just bolts out. We don't know where she went. We see her in the maybe what looked like 1970s McDonald or something, or 1980s. It was hard to tell. But anyway, we don't know. We just know she's not there at the Citadel anymore. We know that these three are back now. And again, like I said before, I don't know if they were locked away somewhere or if they were killed and then recreated by new branching. But they seemed to know about the exiled one. They seem to know that he was down there in the quantum realm, because remember, he's still alive at this point. Okay, so now let's move to 2025. They get sucked into the quantum realm, right? And basically the entire movie, now Quantumania, happens. That results in Kang dying, I guess. I guess he died. We really don't know, right? Remember, he got sucked into that multiversal core, and I think he becomes the Beyonder. But it is worth noting that they thought he died. Remember, the Immortus and Scarlet Centurion and Rama-Tut think he died. Okay, so everybody heads back to 2025 and thinks, yay, we solved everything, right? But these guys are ticked because they realize somebody was able to kill a Kang, as far as they know. They think he's dead. That scares them. Now they're worried. Now they want to protect themselves from the Avengers because they're worried that they've discovered, time travel. They've discovered the multiverse. I mean, we saw it in Doctor Strange. We saw it in No Way Home. Multiverse of Madness in No Way Home, Scarlet Witch, and now in Ant-Man Quantumania. So they are getting worried, and they call the Kang Council. Wow. Whew. There you go. That summarizes the first multiversal war, Loki, and the second multiversal war, as well as all the craziness in the quantum realm. I hope it's all right. I don't know. I mean, it seems to work, but I can tell you this much. A ton of us on the Discord server, because remember, we have a Discord server, a ton of us brainstormed. And I don't think this is even everybody. These are some of the main people. First of all, Surf, huge gold star. Surf, you are the man. I can't tell you how many hours we sat on VCs talking this through. But also Dojo Danger, Titan, Trash Panda, and Pizza Plays. All of you guys, they sat on VCs, we did chats, etc., trying to get this to all work out. I'm not saying it's all perfect, but it's the best we can come up with. This seems like the order of where things went and where things may be going in the future. Speaking of, though, there's one more thing to talk about. I do want to talk briefly about the ending of the movie. It really felt like something was off in the end of the movie. And even Scott felt that way. Remember, Scott kind of stops at one point and he's like, did Kang really die? Are we okay? Is everything going to be all right? Oh, yeah, it must be. And he keeps on walking along. But look at the expressions of the people that see him, like that lady on the right there. And she wasn't the only one. There were several other people that had this expression. Now, granted, when you see somebody famous, you can get a little starstruck, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I saw Scott Lang, and he's really famous, right? I don't know, though. That expression looks more like somebody who just saw a ghost. So I'm going to throw out a crazy idea. We know from Jeff Loveness there's one quantum realm and multiple universes. And I'm throwing out in the video that somehow the quantum realm sorts it all out. I have no idea how. But so if you enter from different universes, you always exit back into your universe. However, we also know that incursions break down the barriers between universes, right? We learned that from Multiverse of Madness. So is it possible that when Scott and Hope and Janet, Cassie, and Hank all get out of the quantum realm, maybe they went to a different universe, 617, for example. Who knows? But I just know people are acting really weird when they see him. Something is weird going on. So is this an incursion? Is it some other type of incursion? I don't know. But I will say this. We've had a ton of incursions already. Let's look really briefly at all the incursions of 616 that have happened up to this point. Of course, you've got in Endgame, Thanos came from a branched universe. So he was from a different universe. We have Tony Stark defeating him with Infinity Stones from a different branched universe. We have Gamora, who's literally still here, but she came from a branched universe/timeline. We have Captain America's shield, which I personally believe came from a branched universe. We have Wanda using the Darkhold to poke around and try to find her kids in different universes. And ultimately, she went dreamwalking in different universes. Of course, we have supervillains that came from a different universe. We have superheroes that have come from a different universe. And yes, they went back, but they were here, which that causes disruptions. We have the goo, Venom's goo that he left behind. That's still here from another universe. We have Mordo from 838, who I think is going to want revenge and may actually be coming to 616 for a fight. We have Doctor Strange, who did multiple occurrences of dreamwalking. Awesome scene, by the way. Still love that scene. And of course, we have whatever's going on with this third eye, and Clea coming to say, you've created an incursion. Well, not just one. I mean, there are a ton. And yes, some of these have been resolved. Some of these, like Thanos is gone. He's dead. And the stones have been returned. But just the fact that they were from a different universe might cause problems. And then look at all the occurrences here that are still here. The Gamoras, the Shields, the Venoms. Man, we are really rocketing forward towards major incursions, which of course will lead to Secret Wars and Battle World. So very, very, very cool. And the other thing we know for certain, Kang will return. As we saw in the end credits, the last thing they had up there was Kang will return, and I'm going to say Kangs. They should have put plural because there's a lot of them coming. All right, so hey, I've covered tons of things in this video. Please leave your comments. I'd love to know what you think about it. Also, don't forget, we do have a Discord server. That's where I got a lot of the ideas for this video. Thank you to everybody again that helped. I'm going to put a link as a pinned comment with this video so that you can go out and join the server if you're interested. And also, don't forget to like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we can all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.